Welcome, friends, to the Play Guitar Podcast. I'm Lee, and I'm here to help you become the guitar player that you always wanted to be. We're talking about bending strings today. Have you ever had any problems with bending strings? Do you ever feel like it doesn't really work out for you? This is the audio podcast. Even if you're seeing it on YouTube, this is the long form show. So we're going to get into it a little bit more. If you're looking for the lesson, click the link in the description. I went through a bunch of examples, and I have had some exercises for you in our string bending lesson this week. But we're just gonna get into it a little bit. We're talking about blues guitar. This whole first quarter of the year is blues guitar oriented. And why do we bend strings on a guitar? Well, it sounds cool, right? It makes it sound like emotion. It makes the guitar cry. It could be a shout. It could be singing. But I'm going to explore all the different problems that we might have bending strings and how to use these and add a little depth to your playing. We'll cover bending techniques, why bends are so powerful, and how to practice them for some serious impact. So let's talk about this. The first bend that I did in the lesson video was the 6th fret on the B string. And why that's important is because it's the flat 7th. It's in the minor pentatonic, and it's a whole step away from the most important note, the root. So bending strings is really interesting. If you look in blues, most of the time it's bending up to a strong note, but you don't always have to do it that way. What if we bent the root? There's a G up here at the 8th fret. What if I bent that a whole step? Now here, if this is our chord, it's bending up into a weak note. It creates tension. All of bending is about creating tension and release. You can start on a tense note and smoothly get to the release, or you can start on a strong note and bend up into tension and leave it there if you want, or bring it back down. Bending is, I think it's a thing that happened when I was learning guitar that made it the most fun. The people that I listened to that bent strings the most first was Stevie Ray Vaughan. And then I went in to look at some of the other guitar players, and then Albert King. They were very similar. In fact, Stevie Ray Vaughan's style and Albert King's, Stevie Ray's does a lot more than Albert King does, but it's very much based on that. And I've got my got my outline here that, you know, we'll look at for just a second and do our own thing. I have a feeling. But when I started doing these notes and bending them up, I was happy to just hear the bend part, right? I didn't pay any attention to the release, the note I was bending to. And for, I don't know for how long, you know, as a young player, I would just bend notes hoping for the best. And maybe that sounds familiar to you. You know, just bend it there. And I bend it as far as I could before my hand started hurting. And that usually wasn't enough for, if I was going to bend this, let's say the 6th string, I'm in the key of G, the 6th string, 6th fret, on the high E string. And if I was going to bend that, there was 2 places that I might want to bend it to: a half step or a whole step, or maybe even a minor third, if I could make it that far. But I'm assuming I probably was bending notes probably halfway between a half step and a whole step. Probably about like that. Why? Because with the tension on the high E string, that's where everything started to fall apart for me. It would get too tough. I could feel it. It felt like it was cutting into the calluses of my, whatever calluses I had at the time, of my fingers, and it would stop. And I really didn't think much about it. I was just, oh, that's how you bend strings. I see other people bending strings. And then when I started to record myself, that's when things changed. That's when I realized, oh, that bend sounds kind of sour. I got to the point in my playing where I was like refining things. How am I actually playing versus how do I think that I'm playing? So getting my bends in tune was a really important thing. Something I had to pay very close attention to. if you start doing target notes, one of the things in the lesson this week, which I really suggest that you go and check out, is target notes. Playing the note right after the bend. So if I'm playing this F going up to G, I play a G right afterward. Now I got something to compare it with. So if I was going too far, I could hear that, or not far enough. It has almost a sour sound. And that is on pattern 2, the extension of pattern 1, up on the 8th fret, bending up to it. That's a C, bending up to a D. And then so I jump up to the 10th fret and play that. That was huge for me. Taking time in my practice to bend a string up to a note and then play the note I was trying to target at the same time, it made it wasn't just an effect anymore. It wasn't just bending for bending's sake. It had a reason. I had a reason to bend, right? I wasn't just doing it because Stevie Ray Vaughan did it. I wasn't just doing it because David Gilmour did it. I did it because I was playing that bend was actually a note I was trying to get to, which is what a singer does when they swoop from under a note and go up to the note. It's very, very, very an important thing to do if you haven't spent any time. I guess what this whole thing is about is to make you pay attention to your playing, to make you pay attention to how these things are coming off. When we're playing, we things feel a certain way when we're playing, and we're not exactly listening all the time to what it really sounds like. So let's talk about common bending mistakes. And that's what I really want to dive into today. What are the things that when people come to me to help with their bending, what are the things that they ask me about, or what are the things that I come back to them with? So one of the problems with bending is, and the big one is what we just talked about, is pitch. But another one is, what direction do you bend? Is there a rule for that? Well, in the guitar, any kind of rule that happens with the guitar is usually short-lived until somebody does something cool with the wrong way of doing it. Now, with bending, and I didn't get into this in the other video, but what my rule was for years was bend towards the dots, bend towards the center of the guitar. So if I'm on high strings and I want to bend, I'm going to bend towards the center of the guitar. That way, I don't accidentally go off the side of the fret and make a strange sound, right? So that would be the E string, the B string, and the G string go towards the center of the guitar, and then the low E string, the A string, and D string would go towards the center of the guitar. Now, if I said that I stick to that and I do that the same way every time, I'd be lying to you. I don't. A lot of times on the D string, I will bend towards, just like I'm bending on the high E strings, right? I especially like to see G, pattern 3. I like in pattern 3 that these 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, they're all in a row, and they're very easy to bend there. There's not a whole lot of places that is really comfortable to bend for me on the low strings, except for in pattern 3. And so what I'm doing here in the key of G, I'm bending the C note that's at the 10th fret of the D string. I'm bending that towards the ceiling, just like I would bend notes on the high string. But then when I go back to the B flat note and I bend that a quarter step, get that bluesy bend there, I'm going towards the center of the guitar because I'm using my first finger there. It's much easier for me when I just bend with my first finger to go towards the center of the guitar than it is to push with that. So that's a cool sound. And that brings up another thing that when people come to me, should I always bend with my first finger? Which finger should I bend with? Like I said, no rules in these things. If you can do something and it sounds great, and you can, there's your argument. How could I say, oh, don't do that? All I can say is I see common problems that occur with this. And that's one is bending with the pinky. So a lot of people will say, oh, I bend with my pinky all the time. Sometimes, especially on the high E string, that tension is so high, it's hard with the pinky to get that note in tune. It's hard to get that pressure in there. So you could put the other fingers, all 3 other fingers but behind that pinky, and do a bend with it there. To me, it still doesn't feel very strong, even with the other fingers supporting it there. So I generally will tell people, hey, you might want to shy away from using the pinky on bends. I like to use the third finger, even if I'm in a pattern that's 1, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 4, the pattern 1. Those 4s, when I go to bend, I am putting my third finger on there. I'm going to reach up with the third finger and probably put my second finger behind it. So I have those 2 fingers pushing the fret across the string. And anytime, like I did before in pattern 3, where it may be the pattern says 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4, I'm going to switch to 1, 3 so that I can use that third finger to bend with. What's the other finger I bend with the most? The first finger. So if you're in a pattern 1, that first finger is great for doing quarter step bends on the minor third. Sometimes I'll bend the 5th, and then the root, not too much, because that's that tension on the high E string. It doesn't really. If I'm going to bend up to a weak note, I want to really have some strong support with the third finger to make sure it's very smooth. Here it goes up cleanly to that weak note, but then comes back to the strong note there. Another thing about bends to bring up is make sure that you're not pushing down, you're sliding across. A lot of people, when they first start bending, they hear, oh, it's not quite getting there. And so they tense their hand up. And that puts force straight down on the fret instead of sliding it across. What you want to do is put the least amount of pressure on the note and use the force from your hand to push it across. I'm not pushing down real hard. You hear that? When I push down really hard, it actually makes the note go out of tune. So it's going to be harder to control. But making sure that and you can practice this, put your finger down on any note that you want to bend and put it on there very lightly and increase the pressure until the note rings true. That's where you want it to be. And now push that note across the string and then come back. The other big thing that happens with bends, and like I said, none of this is on the video, but these are things that people come to me with, is the other strings. That happened this week. So I'm playing, let's say, okay, we'll go back to the key of G. I'm playing the 6th fret on the B string. I'm going to do a whole step bend up to the root. But what happens with a lot of people is when they let go, the other strings that you come in contact with, to get that note up to the root note, the G, my third finger has run into some other strings. I had to push it so far that I'm touching the D string and pretty much almost touching the A string. Yeah, touching the A string as well too. So when you let go of that bend, when you're not, those notes are kind of collected under your fingernail. The pads of your fingers are collecting those up and muting them. But where the problem is when you let go, that letting go of them almost is, it makes them ring out, right? So having all these other notes that are available to ring out, all these open strings that could easily ring out there, is a problem. So just like with slide playing, say you're playing a single note on slide, but your slide goes all the way across the guitar, you have to make sure that not only do you play the note that you want, but you want to mute the notes that you don't want. And whenever I'm playing blues bends, I have the side of my palm resting down by the bridge so that I can slide it back and forth just enough so that I let the note ring that I want to ring out, but mute the other strings so that they don't ring out when I release that bend. I've got here, this is the 5th fret on the G string. I'm going to bend it up a whole step. Now that's running into the D string and the A string. So they could potentially ring out when I let go of the bend. There they are a little bit there. So I'm going to have my palm of my hand right here, just touching the low E string, A string, and the D string, resting on the low 3 string. All of that, I'm moving my hand back and forth, muting different strings. as we go. So those are some of the things I really want to get into today. Another thing that I would like to talk about is how to do it right? How to use bends in your solo. How much should you use those? So there's no real answer to that, but there's definitely a point when they can be overused, where you're bending everything. Now, if you listen to somebody like Jeff Beck, who's always using the vibrato bar, which also bends the strings too. We'll be talking about that on another podcast. But he's bending notes with his fingers on the string, but that's his style. When does it happen in your style? When is it too much or too little? And that's another thing about listening to your playing. So if you're practicing some bends, or if you're planning on playing some bends, take your voice recorder on your phone and just have a habit of leaving 10 minutes at the end of your practice to listen. It's just as important as the actual physically hands on the guitar. Listen to what you did. That's going to be up to you. If you love bends, and I've heard people who do tons and tons of bends, but people ask me, hey, how much should I do this? As an effect, it sounds great. As a vocal styling, trying to get your playing to sound like a voice, it's a great effect. And I don't know. That's a hard one to say. I would assume that if you play every single phrase that you play, it may start to borderline on being too much. But then again, if you think about with vibrato, some people use that on every single phrase that they play, and that becomes part of their style. So that's a tough one to talk about. But if I was going to play a solo, let's just make one here, just over G chord. So whatever I just played right there was a mixture of different articulations. Sometimes I did a rake, sometimes I did a vibrato, slides, quarter step bend, whole step bend. I guess mixing them, making sure it's not just the only thing you do. Applying it in the middle of a bunch of different vocal type stylings could help you as well too. So if you're new to bending, or you're frustrated with bending notes, or say you've been bending notes for a long time, but you never really pay close attention to it, I hope that this lesson and today's podcast help you with that. Bending notes is where it's at. That's the magic of the blues. Make sure you take your time, you practice consistently, and don't be afraid to get that tuner out so you can check your tuning when you're bending up to those notes. I also have a new email course. It's called Blues Solo Breakthrough, 6 Steps to Confident Killer Solos. It is packed with tips and strategies to help you play, and you're going to be confident with every note that you play. And so go ahead and download that. And it's a wrap. Thanks for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. Make sure to hit the button below to subscribe to the show. If you've benefited from this podcast, please leave a favorable Apple Podcasts iTunes review. It's the best way to make sure we get this very valuable content to more players around the world. And head on over to Play Guitar Academy. We've got these weekly Q&As. That's really cool. Plus you get all of the content, all of the backing tracks, all of the tablature for all of these YouTube videos as well too. And we have a good time over there. Be great to see you. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.